Welcome to Wellspring on the Air. My name is Mario Armas, the therapist at Wellspring and the host of today's show, which discusses family therapy. And there'll be so much information here regarding family therapy, benefits of family therapy, and so many important parts where I think that our guest today can elaborate on. Therefore, we welcome Juan Martinez, who's a registered mental health counselor at Wellspring, along with being a certified functional family therapist. So Juan, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Mario. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to be here with you.
It's great to have you here, and such a pertinent topic when it comes to family therapy. It's so funny because in our studies, they talk about the importance of counseling someone within the family system. And I feel that you could shed a lot of light on that. So awesome to have you here and looking forward to this discussion.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, I'll be glad to share any information that I can on this topic. I also find it to be very interesting.
Absolutely, my friend. Absolutely. Well, why don't you tell us a little something about yourself so that people can get to know you?
Yeah. So I'm one of the Wellspring counselors. And I specialize in family and individual counseling, but my work is not limited to that. I do trauma work. I also work with a variety of psychosocial and behavioral issues. Depression, anxiety, behavioral problems, and but definitely my primary focus of work would be family counseling.
Excellent. And, just to specify family therapy, why don't you tell us a little bit about what family therapy is?
Yes, absolutely.
Marriage and family therapy.
Marriage and family therapy, yes. So it's good, and I really want to start with the name. And the reason for that is because I think that a lot of people may have the notion that marriage and family therapy is exclusive to marriage and family work. And that is only true to a certain extent because family therapy is beyond serving those populations. Family therapy is actually a practice of psychotherapy that can be used with families. It can be used with couples, and it can also be used with individuals as well. So I wanted to give that maybe clarification on family therapy, because a lot of people, just by the name on its own, may think that it's exclusive to family counseling or marriage counseling, and it's not. It's just a practice of psychotherapy. So, so family therapy, maybe given a little bit of a background, that's the practice itself. It started to really develop in the 1940s to 1950s, where it really consolidated within the 1950s. And it was interesting because it followed. So after World War II, it was believed that families at the time were experiencing a great deal of interpersonal distress, and family roles became less predictable, and individual choices increase. And as a result of that, the divorce rate started to really skyrocket, right? So at the time, clinicians began to believe that individual problems would be better understood and resolved within the context of the family, which is super interesting, So just to summarize it, or to put it in a very concise definition, family therapy is a practice or a form of psychotherapy that looks at problems within the context of relationships. Excellent. So that would be like the concise definition of things. It really looks at problems within the context of relationships. So it looks at how relationships and the interactions of individuals with problems, how those interactions and the dynamics between them can either maintain or reinforce problems.
Yeah, and what comes to mind is families that are very much used to dysfunctionality. So you function under dysfunction, or family members that are very reactive toward each other, like they know how to trigger each other. Even codependency within some family members, or a cutoff
Yes.
relationship, like two siblings that haven't spoken to each other for a while. A mom and daughter that are very dependent on each other. How do you differentiate like a healthy relationship within the family unit or an unhealthy relationship? All of that falls under the umbrella of marriage and family therapy. And I find it so interesting. But in that pursuit of healing, it's great to have an understanding of not only the current modalities, like the way to address it in therapy, but also the history as to how it came about, as
Yeah.
a strict discipline.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Another thing I forgot to mention is that family therapy was highly influenced by a lot of clinicians that were studying schizophrenia. So like a lot of clinicians that were studying schizophrenia and schizophrenic families, uh, they really, the research highly influenced the development of family therapy. And this was because in understanding schizophrenia and schizophrenic families and individuals, they started to like really pay attention to communication, how it flows, right, in family systems, and how that ultimately really, like I said in the beginning, it either maintains, right, the problem itself, or it reinforces the problem. So that's another interesting fact that I really find amazing about family therapy and the history of it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And it kind of segues into this science of practicality that we were discussing earlier with regards to this
Yes,
topic.
absolutely. So that there's been a lot of research in relation to family therapy and its effectiveness. Um, Now, one of the things that we wanna, I guess, clear it out is that family therapy as a whole is maybe like the framework, right? How you would understand and how to work with clients, with families, right? Your approach to treatment. Now, from that, there's derivatives, there's models, right, that come out of that frame of work. There's different systemic models, which, by the way, I would say that another word, and probably I would say a better word to really describe what family therapy is about, it would be probably systemic therapy, because it
Mm,
really addresses the core, of what family therapy is about, which is systemic therapy. It looks at systems, right? It understands problems within the context of systems. So that's another point that I would like to mention there. But as far as the science of practicality, uh, there's been, for example, models such as the a brief strategic family therapy model, and there was research, two different research that studied short-term and long-term effects on adolescents that had substance use issues and other behavioral problems. And what this two studies found is that, for one, using this brief strategic family therapy model, it showed that children and adolescents with behavioral problems would have a level of engagement and retention higher than other traditional or conventional psychotherapy approaches. And it would also bring a lot of positive outcomes for the family, whether that could be enhancing family relationships and other stuff. And the other part of it, it was that it showed that there was a significant reduction in the number of arrests
mm,
of adolescents that had substance substance use issues. It reduced the number of incarcerations, and also it reduced the externalization of the problems. So, for example, a lot of the time you may, when you think about adolescents externalizing the problem, you often
Right.
can think of like uh, maybe even aggressive, violent, physical behaviors, right? People engaging in fights, um, and other kinds of externalization of behaviors. So that was two really good studies on the effectiveness on brief strategic family therapy models.
On
There
that.
was another one that looked at parent and teen communication predicting treatment benefit for depressed and suicidal adolescents. And so the models, the two models that were tested was attachment-based family therapy and then family enhanced non-directive supportive therapy. And what they found is that these models did had an effect, a positive effect in reducing depressive symptoms in adolescents, and also in reducing suicidal ideation in non-white adolescents and adolescents from lowered income families.
So those
Uh,
models, one of which helps a lot with anger management, acting out, mitigating crime. The
yes,
other one helps reduce suicide ideation, right?
yes, and depressive symptoms, yes,
And depressive
depression.
symptoms. So if you can, again, because this is good stuff, Juan, and this can shed light for those families and family members who are grappling with this.
Yeah,
If you can once more mention each of the models and maybe an intervention or method that each of these models promotes and utilizes, just
yes,
so that people can understand, okay, it's effective, but what is it about each model that
yes.
is effective as far as their strategy?
Sure, sure. Okay, so the models that I mentioned is brief strategic family therapy. And then the other ones is attachment-based family therapy and family enhanced non-directive supportive therapy. Um, One of the things about, for example, the strategic family therapy model, they often look at patterns, sequences of patterns, right? So you get really interested about how families interact, and how the problem functions within the family system, right? And so what a strategic therapist, and look at the word right there, strategic,
Mm-hmm.
so they really work with to strategize around those, around those patterns that reinforce or maintain certain kind of problems around the
So the
family.
counselor sits back, watches the family dynamic in real time, and starts to ascertain patterns based on his or her observation.
Exactly.
Wow.
That's
And
exactly the case.
that's
Yes.
amazing. And then in the second one, what would be the quality intervention in the second model?
So the other one, so well, just to go back to the first one. So the first one, what they would want to do, right, is they want to disrupt those patterns,
Right.
right? Because what families often do is that they do this kinds of attempted solutions, what strategic family would consider as attempted solutions to the problem that actually reinforces the problem. So they
Exactly.
get entangled in a never-ending cycle, in a never-ending loop, right? That is called a feedback loop. That where the problem never gets resolved. It actually is either maintained or reinforced. So it becomes even greater. So what a strategic family therapist would do is that, like you said, he would look, he would sit back, he would look at how, like, the interactions of the family, right? The family dynamics, and then he would really pay attention, not to really the content, let's say, of when the family comes in and they say, well, we're having this problem. The strategic family therapist is now really focusing on what the what the family is stating, right? The content of how they're describing the problem, but he's really paying attention to the process. So that means it's what is happening in the, you know, in the therapy room when they are saying these things.
Yes.
You know, so he's looking at how maybe other family members respond when one of them is speaking about the problem, right? So you're really paying attention to that. And ultimately, what the family therapist wants to do in a strategic family therapy is help. So ultimately, it's help the family create the awareness, right, of
Yes.
how they get entangled in this feedback loops, right? And so he strategized around those family dynamics in a way that they can naturally reorganize themselves by disrupting those unhealthy cycles.
Like therapeutic interruptions. This is such a wealth of information. So if you have a family that constantly interrupts each other, if you have a family that picks on one particular member of the family, or labels, you know, the third child as being the loud one or the rebellious one, you get to see that pattern, you know, play out, and then you disrupt that and try to reframe that so as to reach a different level of what we call homeostasis, like harmony in that. So that entails some very careful attention from the therapist to detect these things. Juan, we're actually going to move on to the second model after we take a short break, because I want to be able to expand on this even more. So thank you so much for what you've contributed thus far. And we will be right back to the next portion, along with some scripture references and the conclusion of the show. So we will be back. Welcome back to Wellspring on the Air. This is Mario de Armas, joined by Juan Martinez. We've had an awesome discussion about marriage and family therapy, and we left off with the idea of models that were conducive towards effective therapy with families. And Juan, you really elaborated on the first one. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about model 2?
Sure. So the other model that I mentioned, it's called attachment-based family therapy. And this one is really good in terms of like when we have clients that really have or their problems stem from like relationship issues. And so one of the treatment goals within this model is to raise awareness of the client's problematic behavioral and emotional patterns that have formed in early childhood as attempts to maintain to primary caregivers. Another thing that this model really focused on is on repairing kind of like those relationships of the ideal primary caregiver, right? That really where the problems really stem from. So it really goes back to like the attachment figures that people have early on in their childhood and how problems really stem from that. So you address that within this model.
So the effective quality of this model is to go way back to some of the root causes that somehow impair the relationship, so as to gain more clarity and to foster that healing between the two people that are currently in conflict with each other.
Absolutely, is exactly what you just explained. Yes, it is through the exploration, you know, of those relationships, and then you also want to pay attention, you know, how that affected, you know, the current relationships that the client has.
So if somebody in that family or both members have issues with control, codependency, right? And if there's like a very strong reactive element in the relationship where, you know, they're not listening to each other, they're constantly, you know, in that dilemma back and forth, there's tension. Where did this first start? And, you know, what is it within you that struggles? And does it stem from childhood, from a toxic relationship at that point? Looking at the patterns, it's just very interesting when you trace something back to gain better self-awareness on the part of both members that are currently in that conflict today.
Yep, you nailed it pretty well. And it, for example, a quick example would be when you look at, like you said, like very dysfunctional relationships where there's a lot of abuse going on. One of the things that you really, for example, understanding, uh, understanding like the cycles within those relationships, you really want to pay attention to, you know, their primary or the initial relationships that they had like early on in their lives. And you could really see that, for example, for a lot of these people, you know, they really experience, for example, or their families experience the same kind of patterns where there was a lot of abuse going on, right? And the same pattern just repeated over it itself,
Right.
you know, in later relationships that the person developed.
Yeah, and then looking into the future, you want to address this currently. Otherwise, it'll spill over into other relationships down
Yes.
the road. So the healing process is imperative for that as well. Juan,
Yes.
such good stuff. And I think scripture has a lot to offer in
Oh
terms
yeah.
of healing and unity within the family and letting go whenever it's necessary. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So making you know, associations with scriptures or the faith, I was looking at how can I connect, you know, family therapy with the faith, right? With us as Christians, as believers. And one of the things that I came across is that, for example, take a look at us, you know, as believers. What are we? And the response to that is we are the church. And the church of Christ, we can look at it or we can understand it as a system that is also composed of many people, in which we are all unique and important. And one of the important things about this, and I think Paul understood this very clearly, is that when we are not working together, when we are not working in harmony, you know, dysfunction occurs and then problems surface from that, right? We cannot really do the best of our job as a church, right? To bring healing and light to the world. So for example, in Philippians 2, verse 2, it says, Paul says, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being in one spirit and of one mind. So I really like this version of this scripture, which is the New Living Translation, because it better depicts, you know, the association with, you know, family systems therapy and the complexity and wonder of relationships. So, you know, Paul definitely understood that there is power in unity, you know, and so when the church is in one spirit and one accord, they are able to really do you know, do what they're supposed to do, right? To bring the light to the world. It is the same thing when you translate that into family therapy, right? You look at problems not as individual, but you look at problems, you know, that, you know, this is not only happening to the individual, but the individual is connected to a larger network. So when
Oh, beautiful.
everyone that is connected to this network works in accordance, right? So there's greater good that comes out of that.
Well, I had an old professor of theology tell me several times, it's good to highlight distinctions, but not separate those distinctions. And it brings me back to St. Paul's famous line, there are many parts but one body. So distinctions, but not separation. You have
Right.
various family members with their temperaments and what they add to the family dynamic, how they enrich the family dynamic, but
Yes.
grounded in the Lord, centered in Christ. So
Yes.
having that vision as a family unit can enrich all the areas of their lives. How powerful.
That's
What are
correct.
the benefits of this? What are the benefits of family therapy, marriage and family therapy?
So I think that one of the best benefits about family therapy is that it doesn't pathologize people, because it removes the blame from the individual.
Mm,
So
great
unlike,
point.
traditional psychotherapy, where they consider problems to arise from a linear, from a linear perspective, right? So A causes B, B causes C, B doesn't have any influence over A, and C doesn't have any influence over B. So in this case, they are not attributing the problem to the person, right? It's not within the individual that the problem is, but they look at it within the larger context, and they see how is this problem functioning, right, in this system, and how is it being maintained. So everyone is part of it. So everyone is part of the problem, but also everyone is part of the solution to that problem. And so what it does, it really removes the blame out of people, so people don't feel, ostracized or pointed towards, like, you are the
Yes,
problem, you need to get fixed, right?
right,
But
right.
instead, you get that unity that we were talking about, right? We were talking about that agreement, right? As a system, as a unit, and they're working together for the greater good, which is ultimately to either, resolve the problem, or at least better cope, better function, with what is going on.
There's no scapegoat, there's a
There is no
responsibility
scapegoat, right?
in terms of the collective. So
Exactly.
I I feel that we could talk for another 45 minutes. We really didn't even jump into marriage, but I also called to mind Genesis 1 that states, that is why a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and the
Yeah.
two shall become one flesh. And it reminds me of the importance of applying these principles within the relationship, the marital bond. So
Yes.
you can make a lot of these same connections to a married couple. And again, we need to come back for another segment on marriage
I would love
to
to do it.
elaborate on this beautiful topic. Juan, it was such a pleasure having you today. You are a wealth of information, my friend, and so blessed to have you here at Wellspring.
Well, thank you so much, Mario. It was an honor to be with you, and I hope to be back too.
It was for me as well. And as we wrap up today, we want to thank you for joining our show. And if you joined this program midstream, you can find this show and others on podcasts at Wellspring on the Air, or on our blog on wellspringmiami.org. The title of today's show was Marriage and Family Therapy. Encourage us and let us know you are listening by sending comments or questions to ontheair@wellspringmiami.org. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Mario de Armas, joined by Juan Martinez. And remember to join us at Wellspring, because hearts and minds matter.